You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts. The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. Today we are joined by Dr. Ed Ashby. Thanks for jumping on with us.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, if people haven't heard of you, if they haven't heard of you from, either your research with the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation or, listening to Ranch Fairy, who seems to be all over social media now, can you give a little bit of a brief background into a little, like what you've been researching, how you kind of got into all this stuff on arrow lethality and broadheads and kind of how you got into bow hunting?
I got into bow hunting because I think it was third grade, I believe. When
nice and early.
Howard Hill came to our school promoting his movie Timber, and I got to see him shoot, and that did it. Went home that day, cut down a willow limb, put some fishing line on it, got some cane, made points out of tin cans, robbed some chicken feathers to put on there, and away I went. It didn't last many shots, but I was hooked after that.
Did you grow up bow hunting in Texas or where out?
In East Texas.
Okay.
Nice. I did a lot of hunting down in more central parts of Texas.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So do you grow up probably bow hunting like deer and all sorts of stuff then?
Well, there really wasn't a lot of deer around there. There were some huntable in East Texas then. Deer population was pretty low. Most of the deer hunting we did, Bob Lee got the first archery only lease in Texas at Wheelock, which is down by Bryan, College Station, A&M University, that area. Mostly I grew up shooting anything I could shoot, from dragonflies to bullfrogs to James Hayes and I did a lot of varmint calling, which was just really starting to be known about. I mean, the Burnham brothers, I think, had the only calls out there of any kind at that point, and they started writing articles in the different Outdoor Life, Sports of Heel magazines like that, and so we got to doing varmint calling, and at that point nobody varmint called, and the poor varmints had no idea what was going on. And James, even we called in and he shot a bobcat. They took up the whole front page of the hometown newspaper. Big deal. People didn't even realize bobcats lived in East Texas.
That's awesome. Were you guys recurve or longbow hunting or compound or?
It was all bad bow. I was about 15 or 16 when the first Allen compound hit the market or was ever seen. It was the first time I ever laid eyes on one. They would look rather antique today.
I picked up a recurve this summer, and boy, is it a humbling experience when you've shot a compound for the last decade. It is a completely different game. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a point I make to some of the compound shooters that, I don't have all my animals for the first 25 years tracked. That had, not written down, nothing like that. But I started collecting data at 82. So I've got not only all my study data, but all my hunted animals since 1982. And there's 631 in there, 627 killed, 4 non-recoveries. But my average shot distance was 15.97 yards.
That's
across
close.
that many animals on several continents.
Yeah, I mean, you've spent decades researching this stuff: penetration, broadheads, arrows, not on cardboard, not on 2x4s, not on ballistic gel, which I've seen. But why did you get into all this? What was the reasoning to even study this stuff?
I came up in a hunting family, and I shot competitive rifle, and Dad was an NRA rifle instructor. So, things about terminal performance were things I remember talking about when I wasn't even big enough hardly to sit at the dinner table. So I was accustomed to ballistics, and I was accustomed to a lot of information being available because firearms have been researched so much. And it was actually the first year that I ever tried to hunt with a compound. And I decided, well, I'm gonna set up and try all this stuff. And so I bought I think it was 65-pound dart and compound, and what everybody was saying to use, which were about 400 grain arrows, and there weren't mechanicals then, but I got the replacement blade, multi-blade broadheads. And that year I hit and failed to recover 4 deer. And I had never done that. And so I said, well, okay, it's time to dig into the books and, read the research and find out what's wrong and see if I can correct it. And, do I need a better bullet? What I'm shooting not good enough. And there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. Not one single piece of anybody looking at the terminal performance of an arrow. And so I started, for my own use, started collecting data. And fate stepped in. I was a couple of years into it, and the guys at in Natal province in South Africa, the game department, wanted to look at the feasibility of using archery equipment to hunt the bigger animals and see if they could get it legalized. Now, at that point, there was no place in Africa where there was a law saying you could bow hunt. There were 3 or 4 countries in the whole continent that were silent, where you could use anything. You go hunt with a rock if you wanted to. But every country that mentioned bow hunting prohibited it. And they wanted to say, they were looking at it from an economic standpoint and a game management standpoint of trying to get more hunters in, more money coming into the country, more money to support wildlife programs, more animals taken off because there's only limited habitat and the animal population gets too big for the habitat that's available. So you got to either get rid of the animals or kill the people. And it's politically incorrect to kill the people. So you got to take the animals off. So they had all these reasons, but they were sitting around their table working on developing how they were going to test this. And the question came up about how big an animal could you take? And one of them said, and I think it was Spud Lettingham, but I don't know for sure, said, somebody wrote me about 5 years ago and asked if he could hunt a rhino with a bow and arrow. And he says, I'll see if I can find his letter. And he dug in his files and he found where I had contacted him 5 years earlier to see if it was possible to get a special permit to hunt a rhino with a bow. And of course, the answer had come back no. Well, they got in touch with me via phone. They tracked me down, got a phone number, and called me and asked if I was still interested in doing this. And I don't know how fast a neural transmission worked, but that's about how long it took me to tell them, yeah, I want to go do this.
Yeah.
And so we planned it out for the next year. So I went over the next year and we hunted the rhino, had a successful hunt on the rhino. And while I was there, they got to talking about this whole process they're doing. And they asked, well, would you be willing to come back next year and bring as many different kinds of arrow setups as you could? Because one of the things we want to look at is the difference in effectiveness of different arrow setups. And they also wanted to look at different shot angles and things like that and how effective they were. And of course, they said, this is on your dime. Said, we don't have the money to pay you for this stuff. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. So I came back and I got, I don't remember what we had, 35 different broadheads, something like that I came up with, and a whole bunch of different arrow setups. Wasn't any carbon shafts then, but I did have some fiberglass shafts. And of course, aluminums and woods, different kinds of wood shafts, from Port Orford cedar up through the hardwoods. And I took all this mountain of gear over there. And the first thing they wanted to do was repeat the rhino, which we did, to make sure it could be done. It wasn't a fluke the first time. And then we went down to Makuzi Park, and we were in there before their annual rifle cull in the park, where they take off several thousand animals that the park just doesn't have the habitat to support. And they're surrounded by all these communal lands with people on them. And so we went in there, and we were backed up by people with rifles. They wanted to take any shot that we thought we could hit, regardless of the shot angle. Didn't matter if he's facing straight away, because they wanted to see what happens when the arrow hits in places it ain't supposed to hit, because they had looked at all of the recovery rates, wound loss rate studies from the U.S. at that point, and all of them indicated plus minus 50% wound loss rates. So they wanted to take a closer look at that. So I think I was there for a month, and I shot 154 animals in that month. And every time we had a shot that we weren't sure was going to be lethal, then they would put it down with a rifle, try to do it remote from where the arrow was. And once we had the animal down, we would dissect the animal and get all of our measurements that we're taking off of it, and try to determine would it have been a lethal hit, would it not. And we had exact criteria set down for that. And if we couldn't determine, they did have a couple of veterinarians on the staff. So the boys load the whole animal up, take him back in, and the veterinarians would dissect it and give us their opinion of lethal hit or non-lethal hit, and what all it had hit, how much penetration, everything. And so we went through all this study. I think we used up most all of the equipment that I took with me.
I would hope so, with that many animals.
It did come up with a lot of interesting stuff that held through the next quarter century. One of the most interesting things in the original Tall study, I made a statement in there that it looked like it took approximately 650 grains of air mass to break a heavy bone. And that turned out to be where the heavy bone threshold is after a quarter century of testing. And, things like that I look back at and I think, that's just amazing that it showed up there. But it's taken us a quarter of a century to pin it down to there's absolutely no question about where the heavy bone threshold is, how durable it is. It exists for all bows. Compounds didn't budget. It is strictly about arrow mass and arrow setup. How long that projectile is able to push against the bone. How hard you hit it didn't make any difference in penetration. It's like that Major League Baseball player, can throw his baseball with well over 100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, but it don't penetrate a buffalo rib very well. Oh,
no.
Pissed him off real bad. So kinetic energy won't kill him. How hard you hit him won't break that bone. But because bones have movements, attachments, that arrow's got to push on that bone long enough to overcome all of that movement and then all of the flexion of the bone before it ever starts to penetrate the bone. And then it's got to have enough of steam left to get that broadhead in to somehow breach the bone. And so that, to me, was the most amazing fact that came out of the whole first Natal study. But I gave it to Rob. Had a ring binder about 4 inches thick, full of all of the raw data sheets from the animal shot. And that was my whole part of the Natal study. Now, they looked at everything. That's just one small part of the Natal study, was the effectiveness of the arrows, equipment-wise. They looked at what the kill or lethality rates were, and they found a great variation by type of equipment that we were using. And they looked at time to collapse, from when the animal was hit to when it went down for the ones that were arrow kills. They looked at the stress on the animal, the stress on animals that were with the animal that was shot. It was just an amazing amount of stuff. I mean, there were a huge number of people involved in this. I was just one cog in this whole wheel of studying it. But anyway, when we got through with it and they wrote this thing up and they presented it to the Natal Parks Board, and they legalized bow hunting in just Natal province, just that one province in South Africa. And by the next year, it spread to every part of South Africa. And then it spread to all the countries around South Africa. So it was the start of the legalization of affirmative bow hunting laws in Africa.
So Ed, let me ask you.
All of Africa to bow hunting.
That's pretty incredible that the research that you guys were able to do was able to downstream impact that. Why were you the guy for the job? Like, what is your professional background? Like, have you spent a ton of time studying this before? Like, why were you an authority for these folks when you went over there?
It wasn't that I was authority. I was the only person crazy enough to want 100 rhino.
That's fair.
It's understandable.
It was, I was just, there wasn't anybody else that nutty.
Mm-hmm. So no one else had.
Probably, when they made the offer, not everybody would have said, "Yeah, I'm gonna cough up that much money to go," because, that's expensive airfare. It's a long trip, and not everybody would go out and buy all that equipment and come do that. So they were happy to have the free help. Qualifications had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess if there's no risk for them. If you're providing all the equipment, you're providing your own travel and all that stuff. They're like, hey, come over and we'll see what we can do.
That's right. And I was dumb enough to sign a thing that said, if a rhino kills me, it's not their fault.
That's awesome. That's cool. So what is your professional background? Like, I know you're a doctor. What have you studied, like, in school at all?
I'm an optometric physician.
Okay. Okay. That's
And,
awesome.
so I've got a good background in anatomy and physiology and things like that, which helps a lot. And then I've got, like we talked about, that innate interest in terminal ballistics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was after the Natal study, but I did a lot of terminal ballistics field testing for Barnes bullets. And so I shot an incredible number of animals. I'm not even going to mention the number because it was in calls. And a lot of people get upset that somebody went out and slaughtered this many animals, but it's the same situation. You've got little islands of habitat surrounded by a sea of people, and you've got to keep those animal numbers in check for what the habitat will support, or they die in mass. Mm-hmm. And there's no animals left. That's just setting up a perfect scenario for some disease to come in and just run rampant through the animals once they become in really poor physical condition because of not having enough to eat. And of course, when they don't have enough to eat, they go out into the shambas, the native gardens, if you want, the villages and the gardens, and eat up everything. And then the villagers start screaming for somebody to come kill these animals that are eating the crops. So if you don't manage the animals, it's a real problem. And, the hunting does have a lot of other advantages. People get really upset with rhinos. If you go kill a rhino today, people just, how could you kill one of these endangered species? And all it says is they know nothing about rhino management. You've got that limited habitat. And once a rhino bull reaches a certain age, he no longer breeds. Yet he's got 12, 15 more years to live. But he will hold his territory. And as long as he holds that territory, another bull can't come in there and take territory. And without territory, they won't breed. So unless you take these old bulls past their breeding age off, there's no place for the younger bulls to establish a territory and then breed with the females to reproduce and increase the numbers of the herds. And on top of that, hunting a rhino you're talking big dollars today. And
oh yeah,
every penny of that in the countries that have rhino, that hunt them, every penny of that is earmarked to go back into rhino management, not just animal management. It goes specifically to rhino management. And whether you're hunting it in Zimbabwe or South Africa, it doesn't matter which country you go hunt one in. And it's really a great management tool that people just don't understand at all. And if they'll look at what's happened through hunting and the use of dollars generated by hunters, the white rhino population started off from 35 animals that were at Umfolozi Park. They actually thought they were extinct. This is southern white rhino. And now in South Africa, there are over 6,000 on private and government lands. So from those 35, using funding from hunters, they brought them back to 6,000. And now, heck, we got some running around in Texas down here. The white rhinos are getting everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty incredible what you can do with conservation of these animals.
And people don't understand the hunter's niche. My good hunting partner, Gordon Cormack, the last of the real African PHs, He, he always pointed out that the conservationists support wildlife management, but hunters pay for wildlife management. That's the big dollars. It's not dollars that come in from conservation organizations. It's the huge number of dollars that hunters pay to come hunt these animals. That's where the real money's at.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I did want to touch on this while it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
You see a lot of folks today. You've researched this for a long time. You see a lot of folks today, and I think there's a lot of influencers, you call them, or hunting personalities. Maybe
I call them promotional hunters.
Promotional hunters. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, most of them work for some company.
Yeah,
some company.
There's a lot of them that are almost solely focused on accuracy of archery equipment. And, you've heard it over and over again, man. If you hit one in the right spot, you're going to kill it with the field point. If you hit one if you're accurate, that's the only thing that matters. How do you feel about that after decades of research on penetration and lethality when people, and with a medical background, you and Ranch Fairy both have one. How do you feel when people say, oh, accuracy is everything? The system that delivers the kill, it doesn't really matter as much, but as long as you can shoot a bow accurately.
Well, the research just doesn't support it. If you hit in the right place and your arrow system fails, it's like shooting big game with a varmint bullet. If that varmint bullet surface pops, never gets through the ribs, it doesn't kill. And you get the same thing. If accuracy is all that mattered, there wouldn't be near the wound loss rate we've got. But they also discount in accuracy that the animal's got a vote in where that arrow hits. There is no arrow that moves faster than an animal's reaction. And we've got hundreds of videos to prove that. But the highest speed compounds out there are not faster than an animal's reaction. One of the things I used to love to do with compound shooters that came to Africa to hunt with us when I was guiding there was that I would show them how fast you can react. I'd go 20 yards down, get behind the corner of the building. I put a milk jug out there with a string on it. When I heard them shoot, I would jerk the string. Now we'd put a target behind it so they couldn't fudge and try to shoot where it was moving to.
Yeah.
They had to shoot where it was. Nobody ever hit the jug. I'm faster than a compound. Of course, compounds then, the fast ones were 285, 290. That was about tops. So that ones now are a little faster. I'm a little older and slower, but I bet I could still beat most of them.
That's so true. We have videos about reaction times and aiming even with a compound bow, and the only thing that is constant in every shot that we get on video is the animal moves. It's not that if the animal is going to move, it's how much. And if you can't accurately determine every single time, even putting the perfect shot on an animal, that it's going to be in that position when you're done.
No matter how good the archer is, how good his shot is, there is no one that can guarantee where their shot is going to hit on an animal. You just can't do it. That animal has a vote in where that arrow is going to hit. And what you need is, and that's what we talk about, the plan B arrow, is an arrow setup that is capable of being as lethal as possible when the shot turns out to be less than perfect for whatever reason. You hit a twig and it deflected and didn't hit where you aimed. There's lots of reasons why that shot cannot land where you want it to. And what matters in those scenarios is the arrow setup. What happens from the instant it touches the animal until it completely exits the animal, if it does exit. That arrow is always flying. From the time it leaves the string It is flying. It flies through the air, flies through the hide, flies through the fascia, the muscles, the bones, all of the internal organs, flies through whatever's on the other side, flies in the air again till it hits dirt, then it flies in the dirt till it finally stops. So what we're looking at is the terminal part of that. I don't care what you're shooting. I don't care if it's a crossbow, if it's an arrow gun. That arrow doesn't know what launched it. All we're concerned with is what happens from when it hits the animal until the arrow stops flying. So that's what terminal research is all about. It's the same exact thing with bullets. Terminal ballistics has nothing to do with the ability to hit the animal. It's all about what happens from the time you hit the animal till the bullet stops moving. And we're doing the exact same thing with arrows. And we're the only people in the world doing it.
Well, and the folks that talk about accuracy being everything, by the way, I think you can be accurate and still shoot a heavy projectile.
Absolutely.
I don't believe that theirs are mutually exclusive, but those people, it's all anecdotal evidence. It's, I still got the animal, or, X, Y, or Z. And it's, yeah, but we're looking at data here. We're looking at science, math. We're looking at real evidence, not just, I saw this happen one time, because I've got 40 of those experiences too that I can lean on and always disprove someone if that's how we're doing it, but it's not data driven in any way.
Yeah, we're looking at frequency of outcome. And ideally we want something that works 100% of the time. And very few things in any testing ever come out to have a 100% frequency. And there's a couple of them in the study that have come out with this 100% frequency, but it's pretty rare. One of them is with that heavy bone threshold. We had every arrow that was 650 grains or greater and had a broadhead with a mechanical advantage of 2.6 or greater breached heavy bone. And it didn't matter if it's single bevel head, double bevel head, whatever. As long as they were mechanical advantage was 2.6, and they had 600, and that 650 is an approximate. Mm-hmm. With various broadhead setups, the range actually ran from around 625 for the really high 3-to-1 type mechanical advantage to close to 675 for some of the marginal, the 2.6 mechanical advantage and a few lumps and bumps in the broadhead arrow profile. They would still breach the bone, but were pretty much spent when they did it, but they breached the bone. Mm-hmm. So we had that 100% frequency. But the midpoint is around that 650 grain point.
So I know a lot of or maybe the bulk of the data that you guys have is for traditional equipment. And some of the arguments that I've heard is, hey, compound bows are way more efficient. Do you think any of this stuff changes? I know you guys are still doing some of that research. The foundation is still doing some of that research, but what are your kind of general thoughts on, like, if we were to reproduce most of this stuff with a compound?
Well, that's what we're in the process of doing. Starting in 2001, our testing there is all with compounds. And now people have a misconception. I did test with compounds and crossbows in the testing. Even back, used a 85-pound Martin Warthog in the original tall study. Mm-hmm. So, we go back a long way with compounds. But when I got to one thing I needed in the testing was to be able to stop the arrow in the animal. because the test medium changes. If you get an exit wound, you're not penetrating animal anymore. You know, and even though animal has all these composite pieces inside it, we wanted penetration measurements within the animal to compare arrow setup A to arrow setup B to arrow setup C. And at a certain point, I got arrow setups good enough that I consistently got exit wounds with the compound. So there was no point in using the compound anymore. So at that point, I dropped back to using just traditional bows, just so I could catch the arrows in the animal. So you can, you know, if two arrow setups are equal, yes, your compound is going to get that arrow system better performance.
Mm-hmm.
But we did find in all of our testing so far from 2001, everything is falling right in line with the earlier studies. Now we are tracking more data points now. We're tracking just over 250 data points per shot. And back when I was testing, I was doing 118 data points per shot. But there's a lot of new stuff now that wasn't there. So we had to add data fields to monitor all of that in the testing to see what kind of effect, you know, it gets. But we're going to have a lot of shots to come out with it. And actually, somebody asked me the other day about how many shots I had in the database. And it was just over 5,000. So if you took 118 data points on over 5,000 shots, that's somewhere over, 590,000 data points.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a lot of data. But I'm interested. That was one of the reasons I wanted the foundation, wanted to establish the foundation, was I wanted to go back and have this stuff verified using compounds, modern equipment, as best we can, and see what we can get. Well, what we know now is that from what we've got so far is the arrows that I typically hunted with, that type of setup, now are, with compounds, are giving complete pass-throughs on Cape Buffalo.
That's incredible. It's so interesting to me though, because not everyone, there's a lot of folks that are in y'all's camp. There's a lot of folks that are in the other camp that, claim, oh, compounds are so much more efficient. Okay, then why aren't we seeing more pass-throughs? There's so many arrows lodged 12 inches into an animal, or even less than that. You see them on hunting TV shows all the time. And you look at, when we talked to Ranch Fairy, he was talking about the amount of kinetic energy you lose just opening the broadhead alone. And I was just like,
absolutely.
How can you not say opening these 3 giant 1-inch blades a piece and putting those through the fur, putting those through the ribs isn't going to be a huge drain in your kinetic energy. It creates drag, if anything. And I don't know how people can't see that. I mean, it just seems so clear to me. Even if you're shooting a way more efficient weapon, it's still the system that's hitting the animal hasn't changed. It's still an arrow. It's still a broadhead. It's just what's pushing it behind it has changed.
One of the interesting things that came out in the data to me is the amount that we can increase arrow penetration over a typically used arrow setup. And you take that typical arrow setup, and I don't care what you shoot it off of, we can, by incorporating the penetration factors in there, we can more than triple the penetration. That means you're going to get 15 inches instead of 5, or 30 inches instead of 10.
But and that's without manipulating the weight of the arrow at all. That's
That's an identical error. The factors in there. But if we incorporate the penetration effect, which is now becoming a possibility, of the ultra EFOC errors over 30%, the magnitude of increase in penetration goes up 6 times. 60 inches instead of 10. That's just astonishing.
It is.
It boggles my mind, yet we have examples of it. We have women shooting 38-pound bows, penetrating 60 inches in Eland. And we've got them with shooting 40-pound bows, taking Cape Buffalo. Things that people would have thought you can't do.
Now, you're not going to be taking a shot at a Cape Buffalo at 80 yards, but...
No. Well, you're not going to do that in your pH acknowledge. Right. I wouldn't even let people shoot with rifles beyond 60 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And then it had to be off of a dead rest, because falling wounded Cape Buffalo ain't no fun.
No, like I can imagine.
It's got a pucker factor all its own.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we talked about this stuff quite a bit. I want to walk through the factors because they're so interesting to me, and I just kind of want to get
all
your
right.
thoughts.
We can do that.
Okay, so it's interesting to me that
one thing before we get into that.
Yeah,
we talked a little bit about people that are doing the testing in gel and foam and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my comparison of that, and I've got a lot of data on why it doesn't work. I tested it years ago, but trying to test error penetration in gel and foam is like trying to test the flight characteristics of a jet fighter by putting it in the ocean.
Explain that a little more. What do you mean by that?
Testing it in a medium that is not, it's not what it was designed to perform in. You got to put it in real world situations if you really want to test what the performance is.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of those penetration tests, right, on all types of broadheads and ballistic gel.
Oh, yeah.
That stuff kind of drives me a little bit nuts.
Yeah, I've got lots of quotes and stuff from FBI research papers, just come out and saying that, it does not equate to performance in tissue, for even for their bullet testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We can get off into the weeds on the 12 factors if you want to.
Let's do it. So I think this is interesting, and I wanted to caveat this. I think this is one thing that people don't understand too much about the factors, and maybe people that just choose not to listen or consume them, is you do not change the weight of the arrow until factor number 6. And I just wanted to say that on the front end, because there's so many people that say, I don't want to shoot a 650 grain arrow.
We're not changing it. We're just saying that, okay, this is one factor you can use, add in or not add in, that will affect your terminal performance. The only place that we really get into arrow weight per se, with saying you need to use something, is in factor 12, which is the heavy bone, reaching the heavy bone threshold. And that factor is not at all important on any shot that doesn't hit heavy bone. But when you hit a heavy bone, that factor jumps all the way up to number 3. It suddenly becomes very important. But it's not important otherwise. And people take these factors the wrong way. They should think of them as an insurance policy. every one of these little clauses you add to your insurance policy helps when things go wrong with your arrow, with your shot. When you hit the wrong place, the animal moves, whatever. And the more of these clauses you add into your insurance policy, the more protection you've got against having your arrow fail on a bad shot.
Well, and anyone that's been bow hunting more than 20 minutes knows that it never works out exactly how you plan on it, and animals move, like we talked about earlier. As we go through these, I kind of want to keep it in the lens of, hey, bow hunting in 2023, when we talk about equipment and kind of how people can use these factors to increase penetration. Right. But number one, structural integrity. Why does this matter for someone in 2023? Are broadheads not made of the same metals? Are they all not made the same way? Quality equipment? What's the deal?
Well, among the broadheads available out there today, there are probably the best broadheads ever made in history. But out there in the broadheads available today are probably the worst broadheads ever made in history. Structural integrity, I don't care what kind of broadhead it is. If it will not perform, if it's going to bend, break, dull, any of these things, that broadhead is not going to be good. But structural integrity takes in everything, the shaft, the outserts you're seeing now, collars, what type of insert you're using. Anything that fails on any kind of shot is going to make that shot ineffective. It's going to redirect the force of the arrow during penetration. Again, once that arrow is launched, you don't know if it came off a compound, a crossbow. It doesn't matter. So structural integrity has got to be there. You can make, and if you watch enough videos, you'll see some perfect placed shots that fail to penetrate. What happened? The structural integrity failed. Something didn't work.
How can someone know the structural integrity of their equipment? I mean, obviously,
you either have to test it on animals, or at least look at what's happening. When you kill an animal, and it's okay, you got enough penetration, get it at double lungs, you kill it. What does that broadhead look like after you've made the shot? How sharp was that broadhead when you shot it, and how sharp is it now? It's never going to be sharper than it was when it left your bow. And it should be surgically sharp there. And there's not many, if any, broadheads that come truly ready to hunt. Even the ones that advertise it. And we've had one in our testing already, in the new testing, that advertised hunting sharp, and we could not measure the sharpness on our best scale sharpness tester. Completely off the chart.
It was so good or so bad?
So bad.
Oh my gosh, that sucks.
It was so dull we could not cut the test medium.
Oh my goodness.
And advertised as hunt ready.
See, there's so many folks that, like, that's the reason that a lot of folks shoot mechanical broadheads, because they don't want to add one more thing to the list they have to do. And when you say that most broadheads are going to come out of the pack not ready to hunt, I think that lazy factor comes out so easily in people, like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to mess with the being. I mean, but at the end of the day, you have to have some sort of respect for the animal. And you, like you're saying, this is rule number one. That's your equipment.
If they're not willing to put in the work, they shouldn't be hunting. work is hunt. It's hard. It is work.
Mm-hmm.
You work to get that animal. A lot of people put out a lot of money to get that animal. And, there's no excuse for the laziness. You owe it to the animal.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. It's the same argument with fixed blade broadhead. I think there's a ton of laziness, and hey, I've probably been in that same camp. So who am I to judge? But the structural integrity part, so that runs all the way from the insert to the arrow to the broadhead to everything, every component. Okay, so every component needs to be high quality.
Proof.
What does that look like in a broadhead? Is there certain types of metals? Is there certain, maybe not getting the manufacturers
or over the type of metal, because you don't know how that metal was heat treated.
Mm-hmm.
In this year's testing, which we haven't written up yet, we had a broadhead, supposedly premium broadhead prototype, one that's being worked on by one of the companies, just fold up on every shot. And when we got back with it in our post shot testing, we ran it through our Rockwell hardness tester, and it measured, I believe it was 34. And it was supposed to be 54. Yeah, that's a quality control thing.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the companies now don't do their own heat treating. They send it out to be done. Way back when Harry Elberg was doing the original grizzly broadheads, he did his own heat treating, and he hardness tested every single broadhead. Now, nobody that I know of does that now. Most of them test, every 25th head or every 50th head, something like that. So you got no idea, really. You got to go on the reputation of how the broadhead is performed most of the time. Right. That's not all you can go with today, unless you've got, want to invest in hardness testers and best measuring scales and things like that, which only a hunter as nutty as me would ever do.
I think you hit it on the head right there. The reputation of the brand and the head and how it performs most of the time. And I don't know, seeing those results through live animals is what gives me the confidence. Like we had a company send us arrows, and I see a lot of people doing arrow reviews all the time. Like out of the box, they shoot them into the target a couple times and like, oh, this is a great arrow. I'm like, how? You haven't even begun to test the arrow. How do you know it's a great arrow? It hit a piece of foam. Of course it's a good arrow. There was nothing there to stop. There was nothing there to test on,
There you go. Dipping it in the ocean again.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what else? Is there anything else on structural integrity? I feel like that one's not, it's simply put, but maybe hard to understand or hard to manage, with all these companies not quality controlling a lot of
it is. It's down to the point now that you have to pretty much build your own arrows. When it comes to inserts at the moment, Rob Nielsen, who's president of the foundation, in his hunting arrows, he has his inserts custom made because he can't find one that's durable enough. Couldn't find it anywhere on the market. So he just has, a master machinist make them for him.
That's a little discouraging to hear that.
Well, you can still find good ones.
Right.
You just can't find great ones.
Yeah.
And you got to consider that, he hunts Cape buffalo and Asian buffalo. And hopefully if he ever gets the permit straightened out, he can shoot a hippo.
Mm-hmm. And
I wouldn't be surprised if an elephant isn't in his future somewhere, but actually, I think maybe taking hippos is tougher than and rhinos is tougher than taking an elephant.
They all seem pretty tough from the outside looking in.
Oh yeah. When you get into the monster animals, it's you've got to build your equipment and have total faith in it, and you've got to do stuff like build, have those custom inserts made anywhere you find a weak point.
Mm-hmm. Where do you typically see the weakest point in today's arrows and broadheads? Is it the insert? Is it the broadheads itself?
Well, it depends. You get some shafts that are just absolutely terrible. Probably one of the worst we've tested is Full Metal Jacket. I wouldn't even shoot small game with that. They just blunderbuss on the end. And I mean, we've got a huge number of them, more than you can hold in one hand, that are just blunderbusted like that on tissues.
I've shot them many times, and I've just seen them flower pedal at the end. Just
flower pedal, blunderbuss, same difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
and after that, I would say broadheads. If you took it across the board, there's more broadhead failures, and a lot of those failures, are going to be that they're not well enough made, not good enough materials in them, and some of the failures are going to be the sharpness of them, the retained sharpness, and that goes back to the quality of the materials that's in them. I would say that's one of the biggest problems in broadheads. But when you get into premium broadheads, like I said, some of those, and I'm qualifying that, some of those probably rank as the best broadheads ever commercially made, ever available in the history of archery. However, just because somebody says it's a premium broadhead doesn't mean it is. I've also seen those premium broadheads that don't perform well. They're showing up in the new study. And, you can pay $100 plus for 3 broadheads and they still not be quality heads and still won't perform, particularly in structural integrity.
That's interesting stuff. Let's talk about number 2, arrow flight.
Okay. Well, nobody ever wants to argue about arrow flight.
Yeah, everybody can agree on this one. No matter where you sit.
It's the enabler for the other factors. If you can concentrate all of that force you've got in the arrow, which is pretty minimal, you got to consider that, you're dealing with force most of the time that's no more than a 22 long rifle. So the force you've got is not a lot. But if you can concentrate it all forward in one direction, in something that doesn't deform, doesn't break, and that makes the most of that force that's available, then you have magnified substantially what you can do. So you should never use anything other than a perfect flying arrow, because poor flight squanders all of the arrow force. But perfect flight will let every one of the penetration factors that follow work at their full potential. And a lot of the factors that follow are those that multiply that terminal performance, that give us that 3 times plus increase in penetration, or 6 times increase if you want to put forth the effort to get up into ultra EFOC.
Yeah, this one seems fairly easy for most people to achieve if they're shooting a properly spined arrow for their setup and they're willing to do a little bit of work on the tuning front to make sure
Yep.
it's shooting completely straight, which, I think everybody, regardless of what you're going to shoot or what you subscribe to, should do this one.
Yeah, they should.
So this one's agreed upon, I think, by everybody, it seems like.
Yeah, most people agree on this one.
And it was interesting when we were talking to Troy. He brought out his mega arrow and was just using it kind of illustrative. And he was talking about, he's like, no, you can literally have an arrow come off the bow and hit with the nose going up.
Oh yeah.
And we were like, what? And he was showing it to us. I watched videos of it happening. If that arrow doesn't impact going straight or flying perfectly and the way it should, there's no wonder why other things don't work.
Oh yeah,
you come in sideways, it ain't gonna work.
Penetration out of it. It redirects the arrow, causes the shaft to want to swing around to one side. It makes the arrow push against the tissues as you're penetrating. It really hurts performance.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I got to spend a ton of time on that one. That one makes perfect sense to me. I think everybody should be able to agree on that. I've been using the new Exodus Rival cell camera for the last couple months, and I have found a beautiful mainframe 8-point with tons of stickers to go after this fall.
Ooh.
One thing I do appreciate about Exodus trail cameras is all of the cameras share the same data plan, so you only pay for what you need. A lot of cell cam companies charge you for HD pictures. I've seen prices of $5 for 50 HD pics. Exodus is going to give you unlimited HD pictures right to your phone, which is awesome when you're sitting there in the middle of the summer and it's 100 degrees and you just want to binge a bunch of trail cam photos.
If you're looking for a solid cell camera with great performance and a 5-year no BS warranty, go check them out. So as we all know, hunting gear is something people can make way too complicated. Arrows can be the exact same way. Instead of going down all those rabbit holes trying to sift through the endless information that's online and you're not really sure if it's right or wrong, Exodus makes it simple to get the right arrow for your exact setup.
So go online to the Exodus Arrow Builder. It takes less than a minute. You're going to enter your draw weight, your draw length, and how heavy of a point you're shooting. And it's going to be that simple. Let the guys at Exodus take care of the rest.
So if you're interested in Exodus Rival cell cameras or a new set of their MMT arrows, just go to exodusoutdoorgear.com and use code HA15 for 15% off anything on the website.
Once again, that is exodusoutdoorgear.com. Use code HA15 at checkout for 15% off. Now let's get back to the podcast. On factor number 3, FOC seems to be something that has been kind of caught a little bit of buzz in the last 5 years, and there's a lot of folks concerned with it. What is forward to center, and why does it matter in terms of penetration?
Well, forward to center is a term that comes from aeronautical engineering. And what it actually means is that for a body in flight, the FOC is the distance between the gravitational center and the center of pressure generated by the air against the projectile as it's in flight. Now, we don't use it that way in an arrow, although we're trying to get a way to do something. And the reason we measure FOC is simply so we can duplicate our arrows. You've got to know what the FOC is in order to be able to make the next arrow exactly like it. So it's important to know it from that standpoint. And, for years and years in modern archery, we'll take modern archery as the period of time since bow hunting became popular in North America. We've used normal FOC, which is below 12%, or high FOC, which is between 12 and 19%. Now, that's all we use. That's it. And when I started studying FOC, I actually made the statement on a archery post that I didn't think it was going to have that much effect on the penetration. Boy, can I eat my words.
Why did you think that? You
Well,
just
I
wouldn't.
I just thought, wait, where you put the weight, what effect's that going to have?
Right. It's still the weight. If it's
It's still
550,
the
it's
weight.
still 550.
Yeah. And at that point, I was having success using arrows that were my typical buffalo arrow was about between 875 900 grains, and it had an FOC of 19%, and that's only because I was using forage woods, which, if you don't know, are compressed cedar shafts, and later they made them out of mountain hemlock compressed. But they are compressed at a different ratio. What they did was take a tapered billet and compress it down to a square billet. So that the compression rate at the front end of the arrow was 3-to-1, and at the back it was 1.6-to-1. So you had denser wood at the front. Now, it was originally made to strengthen the arrow so you wouldn't get breakage where the taper, wood arrow, you cut a taper, fit up in the ferrule. And that was a commonplace when you hit heavy bone at an angle for the arrow to break, was that taper would snap off right back of the broadhead ferrule, and your penetration would be nothing. And in order to counter that, they came up with this to strengthen a wood arrow. It made the arrows significantly heavier, but it also pushed them up to 19% FOC, and using just standard broadheads, commonly available broadheads. And a lot of the success that I had was probably because of that. When I actually got to testing FOC, it was at 19%, where I could first measure penetration gains that unquestionably were from nothing except the amount of FOC.
That was the only factor you had changed.
I had identical errors, identical outside dimensions, everything the same when we're doing the FOC testing at any given level with any given arrow setup. We'd have two matching arrows in external dimensions. Only difference being where the FOC was. And what we discovered as we went on with the higher FOCs is that the increase is exponential. So you get a certain percentage increase when you go from 19 to 20 compared to the penetration you had at 19. When you go from 20 to 21, you get a greater percentage increase of the increase you already had between 19 and 20. And every time you go up, you get this compounding effect of the percentage increase. And when we got to about 29% FOC is where we found that we had tripled the penetration just by changing FOC. Nothing else on the arrow except the FOC.
What do you
and
think?
We actually went, as it turns out, we went from using the same external dimensions on an arrow. We went from 10% when we were at 19%, all the way up to 30% when we hit 29%. So we went, from 10 inches to 30 inches of penetration on the same arrow as we changed the FOC from 19 to 30%. But when you look at it on a graph, that curve starts and gradually increases and increases. And when you hit about 25%, it starts going up quite steeply. and it gets steeper and steeper with every percent you go up.
What do you think the average FOC for someone shooting a 450 grain arrow with a 100 grain point with no consideration for it at all? What do you think that range is?
Between 8 and 10.
8 and 10. Okay. And how do people manipulate their FOC without changing the weight of their arrow if they wanted to do that?
Well, it depends on how light their arrow is to do that. But what you need to do is move the weight forward. Now, one of the things I didn't have near the selection of stuff to work with now that you have now, but there were carbon shafts, is I would go to lightweight target shafts. Gold Tip made some that I use. Now, I'm shooting a longbow that has no shelf in it, and that's intentional because it lets a weaker spine tune because it has to bend further around the bow. So I would go to these target shafts that weighed 6.4 grains per inch. And then all that weight I had shed goes as far forward on the arrow as I can get it, which is the broadhead. And that's how you push the FOC up without making changes in weight.
So the best way to change it would be as far forward as you can with the broadhead. If you've maxed that out per se, you can go with an insert.
You can think of the whole thing at, if you've got a broadhead and an insert, outsert, whatever, you can think of that whole thing as weight at the front. But weight on the broadhead does you more good than weight in a collar or an insert because it's further forward. But it's really important when you get to these ultra high, the ultra extreme FOCs, and even the upper reaches of extreme FOC, 26, 27, up through there, that you do everything you can to reduce weight on the back of the arrow. Because as the FOC gets higher, your balance point moves forward. So you've got a shorter lever arm. And at the back, you get a longer lever arm every time you increase the FOC. So with this long lever arm, any weight you have on the back of the arrow has a longer fulcrum, so it can generate more force. So doing things like not using wraps, going from vanes to feathers, which are substantially lighter. I have seen some people even trim the base of their knot to take just an extra grain off,
or not shoot a lighted knock that's 15 more grains than a regular knock.
A lighted knock works against you big time. You're not going to get an ultra EFOC arrow with shooting a lighted knock with what's available today.
Mm-hmm.
That's too much weight on the back. And you look at what can be done. The buffalo arrows that Rob currently hunts with, these are coming in at 900 grains, maybe just over 900. I don't remember exactly. But he's shooting 31% FOC.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's why he's shooting through the animals. Now, he can take his same arrow setup with testing we've done and redistribute that weight down, to 18, 19%. And he's not even passing completely through the thorax and breaking the offside ribs.
It's so cool and so fascinating to me, the FOC thing, because without manipulating the weight of the arrow at all, you can increase penetration that much just by distributing it in a different portion of the year. That's not asking much of someone. It's just a little forethought on the front end of how am I going to build this system versus how I did it before.
It is. And, and there's other things about FOC that people don't think about. Because the front lever arm is short, it makes that section stiffer. You take a stiff thing and push it against something, you can penetrate it. But you put that lever arm real long on something and try to push it through, and whatever it is, if it'll bend or break before it'll penetrate through. So by stiffening that front lever arm, it actually makes it easier for the arrow to penetrate objects. There's also an oscillation difference. It creates less friction on the tissues with a lighter back shaft because of it has a high frequency, but a low amplitude of vibration, and it stops very quickly because the back shaft is light, which helps boost penetration. But there's actual flight benefits too. As in an object in flight, airplane, whatever, the higher the true FOC, between that gravitational point and center of pressure in flight, the more stable the object is in flight, which means it's harder to make it change direction. And the more you move that back, the more maneuverable it comes. And that's why things like the F-23 Raptor, F-22 Raptor is so maneuverable. It has a neutral FOC. It is so maneuverable that a human can't fly it without computer assist. But you take a plane that's got a high FOC, and the pilot can sit there and take his hands off of it and let it fly, and it'll go straight. But trying to turn it takes a lot of force. He's going to have to work to steer it around in a different direction. And that's a benefit. What do we want in air flight? Stability. The higher your FOC, the more stable that air is in flight. Remember, it's always flying, even in the tissues. So you've got more stable flight in the tissues too. That means more direct line penetration, like we talked about way back with Aeroflight. If we can get that force going straight forward, keep it going straight forward, it penetrates more. So these are all advantages of FOC that people don't even think about. It actually does more than any of the other defined factors to affect the factors that come after it, except for flight quality. Flight quality still comes ahead of it. But next to that, having high amounts of FOC will do more to maximize the effect of these factors that are going to be followed.
Yeah, that's very well put. So I think that's a great segue into number 4, Broadhead mechanical advantage. What can you tell us about that?
Okay. Now, Broadhead mechanical advantage is, you can think of a broadhead as a simple machine, a series of inclined planes. And from physics, the higher the mechanical advantage you have, the more work, as defined in physics, your arrow can do with whatever useful force it has available. Now, the work of your arrow is penetrating and cutting tissues. So the higher mechanical advantage you can get, the more usable force your arrow will have when it impacts the animal and as it penetrates. In a nutshell, that's the biggest thing about them. Of course, how much gain you get changing broadheads is going to depend on the broadheads you compare. And the higher the broadhead advantage you can use is applicable to all arrows, all designs. And the more efficient the rest of your system is, the more penetration gain our mechanical advantage broadhead is going to give you.
Yeah, I don't want to take a shot at my mechanical friends, because I know there's a lot of them that probably listen to this podcast, and I've shot them quite a bit myself.
There's no mechanical that has a high mechanical advantage.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It talks in here, less energy to push them through the animal. That is where all your energy is getting sucked up, is that mechanical, right? Like
that's a big part of it, but it's also being sucked up because the tissue is going to have to climb a steep grade as the air penetrates. Kind of think of it like if you have two speed bumps that are 4 inches tall, but one of them goes off at a slope of 45 degrees and the other goes off at a slope of about 15 degrees. Which one is going to give you the most abrupt bump when you hit it with your car going 35 miles an hour?
45.
Absolutely. And your car is going to
be holding on
up the air. Yeah. But it's not going to with the low one.
Mm-hmm. So the point behind that is the longer, the narrower, the better. The less steep of an angle on that broadhead, the better it's going to penetrate.
It has a number of benefits, and we'll get into that with some of the other factors. So that there are advantages beyond just the basic mechanical advantage. And we'll talk about the mechanical advantage of the edge itself a little bit later.
All right, that sounds good. Let's talk about number 5. Shaft diameter to ferrule diameter ratio.
Yep. And this was done with sets of absolute matched arrows again. Everything the same except for the diameter of the shaft. FOC is the same, broadhead is the same, everything else is the same except for the diameter of the shaft. And if you get a broadhead that is 5% smaller than the ferrule diameter of your broadhead, then you're going to get about a 10% penetration gain. But if you take that shaft and make it bigger than the ferrule diameter of your broadhead, you're going to lose about 30%. 30% of your penetration. That's a difference of 40% in penetration just between the ratio of your shaft diameter to your ferrule diameter. Now, we tested some shafts smaller than 5%. And of course, didn't have micro shafts available then. And they didn't give any more penetration than the ones that were 5% smaller. So from what data we got, it certainly appears that, there's not a big advantage, if any at all, to having more than this 5% ratio of ferrule diameter to shaft diameter. The big takeaway is you should avoid using arrows, that have a shaft diameter that's greater than that of your broadhead's ferrule. And that's one of the things we've noticed with some of the new premium broadheads. Mm-hmm. Not all of them, but some that have hexagonal or octagonal. I don't remember which they are. Hexagonal, I think, ferrules. So they have these tapers instead of being a round ferrule. And where those flats are, they're smaller than the diameter of most standard shafts. And it creates this bump, this lip between the broadhead ferrule and the shaft that's going to cause drag. Now, how much loss you're getting there, don't have enough data yet. It's going to take a long time to build enough data that we can say this is the exact amount of difference it makes.
Well, it's funny you say that because I was in an archery shop one day and I was shooting expandable broadheads and FMJs, and my arrow was significantly larger than the broadhead at the ferrule. And uh, I was like, should I be concerned with this? I asked the archery techs. Oh, no, it's fine. People do that all the time. And what I'm hearing here is that absolutely takes a significant portion of penetration away.
It certainly does. And that was tested. Yeah, we had mechanicals in the testing on that. The size of the hole you cut out there doesn't affect that drag a lot. The tissues are going, they're flexible. They're going to collapse back down, and they generate significant pressure, against the arrow shaft, creating drag. And if you can make that arrow shaft smaller, you tend to create a space in there where blood can flow easily. Think the small capillaries blood can pass through.
Mm-hmm.
And the blood can get on the shaft and actually helps lubricate it, I think. And I'm just saying, I think that's what's happening.
So on the topic of arrow diameter and the ferrule and stuff, are you a supporter of like micro diameter arrows when talking on the topic of drag, or does it make a difference in penetration shooting an arrow that is smaller, less surface area, right?
We haven't tested with the micro shafts. For one thing, most of the micro shafts won't support the heavier heads. And so that's a drawback to them. Yep. But in theory, yes, the micro should help. But in our testing, we did not find, now we didn't go down to micro shaft diameter, but we didn't find an increase in penetration in the testing we have between the arrows that were 5% smaller than the ferrule and the ones that were 7% smaller.
So there could be some diminishing returns there.
There could be diminishing returns.
All right, to be determined.
To be determined.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about number 6, arrow mass and weight. I think this is where a lot of people throw their arms up and get frustrated when it comes to archery. People are telling me to shoot a heavy arrow. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you're saying that, but there's a lot of folks that are very triggered when it comes to this topic. So what do we know about arrow weight and mass when it comes to penetration?
One thing you can demonstrate easily is that greater arrow mass increases your bow's efficiency. It absorbs. Now, your bow is a constant energy machine. It can produce X amount of energy. And this is properly using energy. So the amount of energy you get into your arrow from your bow is going to be dependent on how much of the bow's stored force the arrow can absorb. So increasing the arrow mass absorbs more of the bow's force. So your arrow has more force. That's one reason that heavier arrows make your bows quieter. There's less leftover force to go into vibration. It reduces the hand shock of your bow. So you're making more efficient use. And anybody with a chronograph can prove this. All you got to do is start shooting arrows that are a given weight and then start going up in heavier ones and measuring the kinetic energy and the momentum. It goes up as you go up in arrow weight. Now, when we get to penetration, we have to look at momentum. Has a better correlation. Neither one's perfect, but it's a way better correlation to the arrow's penetration than kinetic energy is. Kinetic energy is like that baseball hitting that Cape Buffalo. That's all it tells you is how hard it hits. Momentum is a directional force in physics going one given direction. In this case, that direction is forward. So the amount of momentum you've got has a correlation to the amount of penetration you're going to get with any given arrow setup. Now, how much of the arrow's momentum comes from its mass and how much comes from its velocity becomes a factor when we look at penetration. Because as the arrow penetrates, it loses velocity, but its mass always remains constant. So the more of the arrow's force that arrow absorbs from your bow, that is concentrated in the mass of the arrow, as opposed to making the arrow go faster, becomes a factor. Now, while we're on that, there is also a factor of increased resistance the faster you shoot. So if you take the velocity of an arrow and double it, the resistance of the tissue has gone up by the square of the increase, or a factor of 4. So you have 4 times as much resistance to that twice faster arrow than you did with the slower one. And people look, if they'll look at the amount of penetration you get with low poundage traditional bows and compare that to the penetration that one gets with the higher velocity compounds, you can see this effect of velocity. And another place we have noted it, and we have information on close to, or maybe over, a couple of thousand buffalo hunted with arrow systems now. And what we're seeing with the compound bows is that more people shooting 65-pound bows are getting pass-through shots on buffalo than are people who are shooting heavier drawweight bows. Quite an interesting finding.
That is very interesting.
The only explanation I can come up with is the lower velocity of the arrow is meeting less resistance.
That now I'm a dummy, but that makes sense to me. The lower it gets kind of mind-boggling when you think about it like that. An arrow that is lighter going in at a lower velocity encounters less resistance, therefore penetrating deeper. But you would think, oh, an arrow that's shooting so much faster is going to hit so much harder. Yeah, but it's going to have a heck of a lot more resistance when it does.
A heck of a lot more tissue resistance.
Oh my goodness.
There are people out there shooting very light draw weight traditional bows on deer. You know, they're shooting 450 grain traditional arrows, and they're getting pass-throughs on deer. Yet you got guys out there shooting the same weight arrow out of 70-pound compounds and not shooting through the deer. Now, some of it's probably the mechanical advantage of the broadhead. You don't get many traditional hunters that use a mechanical head.
No, I don't think I've ever seen that.
No, they don't have the force to open them. Of course, I could open them out of my 94-pound bow I tested with.
Yeah.
That opened them just fine.
What I like that you said here too is bow hunters should use the heaviest arrow that delivers the trajectory that they can live with.
Absolutely.
So I think that is the key right there. As heavy as you can, that still gives you the trajectory and the ability to shoot at the distances and stuff that you want.
Yep.
And that's just one factor in this. Weight was one factor out of 12.
Now I am one of those people that is adamantly opposed to these people that go out and take these 60 to 100-yard shots on elk. Mm-hmm. The flight time of the arrow out there, all that else got to do is take one leisurely step and you've got a gut shot. And he's got more than enough time to take that leisurely step just to reach another clump of grass or something. It's just some, I've hunted, a fair number of elk, and I've hunted a lot of plains game and open terrain, caribou up in the tundra, and, all sorts of situations like that. And I've never had to take a shot that long. And when these guys ask me about how I can use these heavy arrows and cope with those long shooting distance, I don't cope with those long shooting distance. I'm a better hunter than that.
Mm-hmm.
I found it way more productive to invest my time in developing hunting skills than I did in trying to become a pinpoint accurate shooter.
Yeah, that's you see, the thing is like you can work on shooting longer distances and being more and more accurate, and I feel like it takes a heck of a lot less time to do that than to go out there and get the experience to get closer and closer and closer to the game.
Yep. Developing hunting skills takes a lot longer. But the trade-off is you kill a lot more animals because you're not shooting those long distances. You've increased your arrow's terminal performance because of the distance. You've increased the size of the kill zone relative to the accuracy you shoot with. There's all sorts of advantages to getting close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that would be my piece of advice is get as close as you absolutely can. I mean, shooting at 80 and 100 yards, I don't know what the momentum or the energy lost at those distances, but holy crap.
Just looking, got it all grafted out.
Yeah. Just looking at the trajectory though, on the arrows, like I wouldn't be asking that thing to poke through when I just watched the loop that it had to take to get there.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
But, as an aside, people talk about the heavy arrows aren't accurate. And Rob Nielsen has got 2 arrows over 1,000 grains that he Robin Hooded at 60 yards. And
That's
he's
impressive.
got his buffalo arrows, which are over 900 grains. And he has, I think, 2 of those that he's Robin Hooded at 70 yards. These heavy arrows can be very accurate at long range. You gotta tune them. You gotta have perfect arrow flight. I don't care if you're shooting a 300 grain arrow or 1,000 grain arrow. That still, you've got to have that perfect flight. You've got perfect flight, you can make them hit in the same spot if you're good enough.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of folks, and I've probably complained about it a little bit too, of being like, well, I lose range, or it requires me to be even more accurate on my ranges or my distances because the arrow is going to drop more, like the sight tape has,
Yep.
That's an issue, right? Or that's what people cite all the time. But
a trade-off on that is that if you're shooting a heavy arrow, and Troy's got all of this data too, your pin gaps become consistent. It has a more of a smooth arc with the heavier arrows, as opposed to one that goes up and begins to drop faster.
Yeah.
Because that lighter arrow is losing its trajectory. That's the same reason that a rifle shooter that's doing precision, long range shooting uses a heavier bullet. Longer flight time and stuff, but he has this smooth arc out there and doesn't have this abrupt drop off at the end of his trajectory. And so it offers you an advantage that way in the flight of the arrow. So if you have these consistent pin gaps and you've got a 50 at a 60 yard pin, and that animal takes a few steps and he's now, maybe 64 yards. You just bracket him between your pins.
Mm-hmm.
And you do the same thing if he's between 10 and 30 or 10 and 50 or whatever you set your pins, 10 and 20 yards. These pin gaps tend to be consistent all the way out because of this difference in the arc of the arrow with a heavier arrow. And with practice, it becomes much easier to work, to be able to adjust to a different shot when that animal moves after you've just got through taking your laser rangefinder, finding out that he's, 59.7 yards. And so he takes a few steps. You say, oh, where is he now? Well, you can use that bracket much better to make a hit if you don't have time to go back and laser him.
Yeah.
Of course, my approach of getting closer is still the best.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I would agree with that. One of the themes that I'm seeing through this conversation is these things take effort. They really do. And
it's hard work.
It is. And I know folks, and I've been one of them, so I'm not judging. I've picked up a bow 2 weeks before the season. And if you were trying to figure all this out in a very short period of time and under high pressure, fixing to go on a trip, yeah, it would stress me out too. But it's like, if you want to get it right, it's going to take effort. It's going to take a lot of effort.
It's like your precision long range hunter. He's not going to pick that rifle up and just go out. Your sniper, he's not going to be able to go out and hit something at 900, 1,000, 2,000 yards without spending a lot of time working on his equipment and his skill to be able to do that. Anything that you do, if you're going to do it right, takes hard work.
Yeah. And
that's just one of those life lessons.
Yeah. There's a certain level of confidence too, when you know you're taking the right bat to the ball game.
Absolutely.
My buddy Jake has talked about that. It's like, I'm changing all these things about my arrow. And the reason is because when I do those 1 or 2 times a year that I get an opportunity at a good deer, I want to know I'm taking the right thing to the ball field.
Yeah. I'm a real big advocate of, you really should shoot the same arrow setup on everything you shoot. You build your arrow setup to be adequate to handle even your plan B hits on the heaviest animal you're going to be hunting. And then you use that arrow setup on everything. You become very familiar with that arrow setup. Now, like mine, I would use my buffalo arrows on everything down to rabbits. I would change, or squirrels. I did change heads. I would go to a blunt on really small animals, still keeping the point weight the same. And, I would go to a wide cut broadhead when I turkey hunted. But still keeping the same arrow weight, so that my brain, my body became accustomed. It became ingrained that this is the flight of your arrow. And it's amazing how good you can become at making adjustments automatically without even thinking about it, just because you're so familiar with how that arrow flies.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tinkering that goes along, or, happens throughout the year on a lot of people's setup. I want to change this. I want to change this point weight. I want to go with these veins. I want to change. And they probably don't get used to shooting the right setup all year long.
No,
it's constantly changing.
And that, I think, is a drawback for people. I would not go on a hunt if I had at the last minute to pick up a bunch of arrows that were grossly different from what I'd been shooting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, we've spent a good amount of time on these first 6. Maybe we can go through 7 through 12 a little bit quicker.
Okay, we'll try to.
And no worries. I mean,
it's hard to do.
It's a good conversation.
When we do our presentation of the 12 factors, with slide presentation and so forth, it takes about 4 hours. Yeah,
100%. So for people that are listening, go check out the other resources that we'll talk about in the end of the podcast. But this is in no way going to be fully representative of what you guys have done. But number 7, broadhead edge finish. What can you tell me about that?
A smooth, beard sharpening, shaving sharp, surgically sharp, if you want to think about it. Honed and stropped edge works the best. And its advantage is most pronounced in fibrous tissues. In fibrous tissues, now what we did, we shoot 7 different arrows, and we sharpen them different ways. We sharpen them with a file sharpened edge, and we sharpen them with a hill type serrated edge, if you're familiar with those. Mm-hmm. And we sharpen them with a honed and stropped edge. Then we compared each arrow's penetration back to itself. And we were shooting these into 7 thicknesses of buffalo hide. Now, buffalo hide, fresh, this is all fresh buffalo hide. Each of these well over an inch thick. You know, they got hair, mud, sand, all the stuff that really dulls broadheads. And the smooth, sharp, honed and stropped edge had 60% more penetration on the average than the hill type serrated edge. So it was a real big thing. I won't get into the plotting cascade and all of that, because it does take a lot of time to understand. Mm-hmm. But there's a huge advantage to how you sharpen that edge. It cuts the tissue better. It lets it bleed more freely. And they can go to the website and look up the clotting cascade, and it does a pretty good explanation of why the edge finish is such an important factor. And Troy is really big on this.
So does the serrated edge create more drag because there's dimples and hills and valleys? That's the main point on that?
Yes. There's also a factor in the cutting effectiveness because of the contact time between the tissue and the edge. So the longer the cutting edge is, all else being equal, the better it's going to cut because there's longer contact time. Think of it in terms of cutting a steak on your plate. Do you use a low angle with your knife across the meat? Or do you get your edge up at 50 or 60 degrees, your knife, and try to cut the meat with the tip of the knife?
Yeah, that ain't going to go very well.
Yep. That's an easy way to think of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that one makes good sense too. Number 8 is shaft profile.
Yep.
What about this?
And shaft profile, looking at it today, there's only one place that I know of that you can get tapered shafts. Now, tapered shafts in testing do offer advantage.
And what is that for people, for layman's terms?
A taper shaft is bigger at the front end, and as you go back towards the back of the shaft gets smaller and smaller. And as far as a fully tapered shaft, I only know of one. There are a couple of shafts that are parallel for the first 8 or 10 inches, and then they taper from there back. Didn't test those. They didn't exist then. But a taper shaft has about 8% more penetration than a parallel shaft, and about 15% more than a barrel tapered shaft. Now, you only see the barrel taper in wood shafts, but they're small at the front, small at the back, and fat in the middle. So, that basically is the difference. This is one factor that, looking at what's available today, I'm perfectly happy for people to drop out and not make a 12-factor error, make an 11-factor error. Using a parallel, lightweight, parallel carbon shaft that's, smaller than the broadhead's ferrule. And if they get into EFOC levels, it will more than regain that 8% penetration advantage. A matter of fact, it will gain that between 25 and 26%. it will gain 8% in penetration. So if they're shooting the high FOC arrows with a parallel shaft, they're not giving up much, if anything.
Okay, that makes sense. And since most manufacturers aren't tapered, they're probably going to be smooth shaft for most people that are shooting.
Yeah, if I were building arrows today, I'd be shooting parallel shafts just because of the availability of better availability of high quality parallel carbon shafts. And carbon is the lightest, so that's what I'd be using.
I think that makes sense. So number 9, broadhead arrow silhouette.
Now, this has to do with the sleekness of the broadhead. Any rough or irregular surfaces is going to increase the arrow's drag on all the tissues. It really becomes pronounced on bone penetration, where a little bump like that has got to break a chunk of bone off. And if it's a heavy bone, it's hard for this little bump to break that bone because this little bump has a real low mechanical advantage.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that real steep bump that you run over, the speed bump. Essentially, that's what you're putting on your arrow.
Creates more drag.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And bumpy is everything. Bumpy can be that shaft that's bigger than the broadhead's ferrule. Or it can be spot welding places on a broadhead. It can be where a trocar type tip screws into the body of the broadhead to hold the blades. That's a real common place to see it. So that basically, in a nutshell, is arrow, the broadhead silhouette. And the arrow silhouette, which refers mostly to that juncture of the shaft to the broadhead ferrule.
So someone could easily inspect their broadhead in their arrow than the silhouette to make sure there's not anything abnormal but the bumps.
Yeah. A 2-blade head is easy. You can just slide your fingers on the flat of the broadhead, from the tip to the back.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any bumps at all there? You feel anything? Easy to do.
Number 10 is type of edge bevel.
Yes. Now, this is really highly tested. And we talked about things with 100% frequency. When heavy bone is encountered and you're working with absolutely identical broadheads, except for the type of edge bevel, the single bevel broadhead always, 100% of the time, will outpenetrate the double bevel head. And I had some heads that I was testing mostly with the 190 grain Grizzly. That was sort of my benchmark broadhead. And I had some broadheads that were the exact same dimensions, same width, same length, but double beveled. The Grizzly has a 25-degree single bevel. These had a 12.5-degree bevel on each side of the double bevel for the exact same cutting edge. Yet the single bevel still substantially exceeded the penetration of the double bevel.
What is it about single bevels? Is it the rotation in them, or
what is it? It is the rotation. Bones don't have a grain to them like wood or something does.
Mm-hmm.
So splitting them requires prying it apart. The single bevel exerts pressure in one direction as the arrow penetrates, causing the arrow to rotate. Now, the harder the material is passing through for a given thickness, the more torque it's going to generate. the more breaking power it's going to have. Now, one of our tests that hopefully will be upcoming next year, we'll be looking at how deep into the bone does the single bevel penetrate before it breaks the bone, causes the bone to split. That's one of the things we want to know. We want to know what the effect is with these shorter, wider, almost delta-shaped broadheads that are on the market now, compared to the longer, narrower, higher mechanical advantage broadheads. That torque is directly proportional to the area of the edge bevel that's in contact with the bone. So the heavier the bone, the more contact between bevel and the bone, the harder it's going to torque. And the thicker the broadhead blade, the wider the bevel, and the more torque for a given bone thickness is going to have. So we wanted to use our high-speed camera and look at this on bones. And it's just one of the things I've had on my list for probably 20 years at least, that I wanted to test, but could never afford the high-speed camera to do it with.
They're expensive.
They're expensive. That's the most expensive cash outlay the foundation has made, was to buy this high-speed camera. And we're also going to spend a lot of time looking at skip angles, which you don't see on this list, but it is crucially important and is one of the things that really comes in with tip design. And so we're going to try to do a lot of research on that and define better what the skip angle effect is. And also we want to look at the skip angle effect from steeper bevels on the edge. One of the broadheads we've tested in the new testing has a 40-degree edge bevel. And for whatever reason, there were 3 test shots with it. I think that's in the 2001 testing. All 3 of those arrows visibly redirected. And this was on shooting at Cape Buffalo, 20 yards down, freshly downed animal, broadside, as close to perpendicular impact to the bones as you could get. And yet all 3 of those arrows skipped. Now we had, I think, 6 arrows total, including that one, that were the same weight, different broadheads. And none of those skipped except this one. And so we want to look at why. You know, the glaring difference is that steep bevel. But don't know for sure. But we're going to try to find out with the high-speed camera why that particular broadhead skips.
That's gonna be really interesting.
I think so too.
I'll be looking forward to seeing that stuff. So you talked about it just a little bit previously, but what's the deal with number 11, tip design?
Yep. Tip design really comes in to play not only from the strength of the tip, but from the skip angle. And tested 7 different tip designs, all on the same broadhead, identical arrow setups. And this was one of the focal studies I did. And I don't know how many shots are in it off the top of my head, but it's a lot, a couple of 100 shots. And the Tanto type tip was overall the best performance, and by a large margin.
What does that look like?
The outcome penetration in bone, it averaged 110% better than the worst performing one. and it was 27.5% more penetration than the second best performer, which was a round tip. It also, not only in penetration, it also had the best skip angle. Now, the Tanto tip is a name I came up with. Now, I invented that term. I needed something to describe what this tip looked like so I could put it in my database and know what it was. And I looked at it, and what it reminded me of was if I took two Tanto tip knives and put them back to back, it made a Tanto tip. And most people are familiar with the Tanto knife with the slanted front and the straight cutting edge. Mm-hmm. They're pretty well known. But that's where that term came from. And it came there because strictly I needed a name, and it stuck. And now it's common terminology. But that little tip, and I think most of the Tantos people are using now, are way too wide. They should bring their main cutting blade further forward and use a much smaller Tanto tip. And they would get the same or probably a better effect because it'd take less force to bite into the bone. The biting into the bone is why it had a better skip angle. Now, a true needle tip might do as well as a Tanto tip if they didn't damage. But I've never found one that doesn't damage. And that includes the Silver Flame, which is a really premium quality head. Those are going back to the original Silver Flames. And they were absolutely superb and were truly hunting sharp out of the package. I don't think the newer ones, which are not made in Germany, have as high a quality as those original ones. But I don't have any hard data I'd point to prove that. That's just observing what we see in the testing so far, that they don't stand up near as well as the old original ones did. Mm-hmm. Of course, now we're shooting out of compounds, but more force. Hits harder, is more apt to break something.
Wrapping up here, last one, number 12, heavy bone threshold. What's the deal with this one?
The most quoted, most misquoted, most misunderstood thing in all of the study. Nowhere in anything I've ever written down can somebody show me where it says you must use a 650 grain error. That statement doesn't exist. People made that up somewhere, and they obviously haven't read the stuff, or they would know that that's not true. What we're saying is that at or very near 650 grains of total arrow mass, the frequency of breaching a heavy bone increases for every broadhead tested. Now, it doesn't say that at 650 grains, every broadhead is going to breach a bone every time. There are certain broadheads that will do that, but a poor performance bone penetrating broadhead might jump from 8 or 9% when it's below 650 to 12%. That's an abrupt jump. As you get to the higher performance heads, you get to the point, and this is about the only other place I can think of anywhere in the study. Well, I can't think of one other, where we had 100% frequency. If we had, I think we mentioned it before, a broadhead that had a 2.6 or greater mechanical advantage, and that's going to be a single blade, because no multi-blade head will make that. Won't even come close. and its weight is at 650 grains. They had 100% bone breaching rate. So if you've got that type of broadhead on there at 650 grains, you're going to breach heavy bone. Now, this factor does not come into play at all, is of no importance whatsoever unless you happen to hit heavy bone. So what's heavy bone in a deer? Well, it's the humerus and the head of the humerus. It's the scapular ridge. It's the spine. It's the pelvic girdle. It's the femur and the head of the femur. Those are heavy bones in deer. So if you hit those with an arrow that's set up to handle those heavy bones, you'll break the bone. It's just that simple.
Nothing that you said today makes me feel like people should be in two distinct camps based on these 12 factors. It seems like you can shoot whatever arrow weight that you want and get decent penetration and remain accurate if you follow these steps.
Yep. It's just, they can pick and choose. They can tune their arrow better to get perfect flight. That's going to improve their performance and their success rate. They can change from a low mechanical advantage broadhead to a high mechanical advantage broadhead. That's going to improve their terminal performance. It's going to improve their success rate. They can go from a broadhead that's so sharp to one that's surgically sharp. That's going to penetrate better, cut better, and it's going to improve their success rate. They can pick and choose what they want to use out of these factors. But this is just a list of things that we found in the testing. Out of those 590,000 data points that affect arrow penetration significantly. So the ones you want to use them. The ones you don't want to use, don't use them. But don't be surprised, if something fails. You can use that plan A error and be very successful when everything goes perfect. But it's like hunting a brown bear with a 243. If you put it in the right place and have a good performing bullet, structural integrity again, it'll work every time. But when things go wrong, it's not what you want to be shooting. You not only might be very disappointed, you might get eat.
Well, I appreciate you walking us through this, your background, the 12
my
factors.
pleasure.
It's been awesome to talk with you, and it affirmed all the.
I'm glad to get off in the weeds about anything.
Yeah, it affirmed a lot of the stuff that I already probably thought and knew based on that this accuracy and all these other things that people want to quote are not mutually exclusive when you look at these factors. And I just think that's really, really clear. And I think talking to you even affirmed that more. And I appreciate you walking me through all this. If folks want to consume this, look at some of the factors that they might want to change for this season or really get deep into the weeds, where's the best place for them to see all this information?
Yeah, they can always go over to our website. That's just ashbybowhunting.org. And they can, if they got, a few evenings that they don't want to do or have anything they want to do, they can start reading through the several hundred pages of the test reports, going all the way back to a summary of the original lethality study. So, and they can actually, if they go through all of them, they can find where my opinion of stuff changed as we learn more about it. So it was a long journey for me, and there's a huge amount of information in there. And of real interest to bow hunters today with their compounds, should be to look at Rob Nielsen's 2001 and particularly the 2002 update. We went to a new format in there with a lot more information in the report. And that's why it's 105 pages long. And every line of it is something you got to stop and digest. So it's not exactly light reading, but there's a whole lot to be learned from it.
Yeah, and I think as people who are foregoing the easier method with bullets and powder and probably the more accurate method and going for something harder like a traditional bow or a compound bow or heck, even a crossbow, we have to be committed and be diligent and caring about lethality. We really should care about not only killing these animals, but how we kill them and how effective we kill them and as ethically as we can kill them. And I think that's exactly what you all's research is trying to do. So
that's basically what we're trying to do. One thing I would like to add on there is that if they look on our website under the Getting Started page or over on our advisors page, there's 2 books we recommend. And I think every bow hunter should have them and should read them. Well, they should have the first one and read it. And that's Jeremy Johnson's book. And I don't know if you've read it or not.
I haven't, but I will.
It is the best archery book I think ever written. And I think I've read most of them. I've had a lot of time in camp in my life. And there is a second one there from Jim Aiken. And if you are a crossbow hunter looking for answers, this is the book. And the links there, the information tell you where you can get them and so forth. And the foundation gets nothing out of these. We don't get any royalties off of them, anything like that. We just promote these because we think they're the best information out there. So that's a really good place for people that are new or that are disappointed in the results they're having. Good place for them to go and find a kind of condensed version of that's a lot less pages to read than my studies.
There we go. If people are looking for the easy way out, go check out those books and just go check them out anyways. They sound like really good pieces of reading. Ed, thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.